As we know, the charge against Gordon Brown is that he is frit, that he was tempted to go for an early election, but having seen the latest opinion polls, he bottled it. So when I talked to him in Downing Street yesterday, I put it to him just a week or so ago, and the election really had been on the cards.
As Prime Minister, you've got a power and you've got a responsibility. Your power is that you alone make a decision about elections. The responsibility, however, is to listen to people and to exercise that power with responsibility. So yes, I think I had a responsibility to consider it, to listen to what people were saying, to listen to what the opposition parties were saying, to listen to what people in my own party wanting an election were saying, to listen to the public, who I believe the public, their priority was not an election, but that we got on with the job. But having made the decision, I made it for the reasons I'm saying. I want a chance to show the country that we have a vision for the future of this country. And yes, I could have a mandate or want a mandate for competence, but I want a mandate to show the vision of the country that I have is being implemented in practice.
Your advisors were suggesting you went.
And there were people who were saying that you should go, there were people who were saying you shouldn't go. But, you know, I made the decision for a different reason. The decision I've made is because I want to get on with the job of change in this country. And I believe I've got to show people that we're implementing the changes in practice. And I believe that what we're really talking about now in Britain is the rising aspirations of British people. They've got to be met in housing and home ownership, they've got to be met in education, they've got to be met in the health service. And I want the chance to develop and to show that the policies that we are developing for this will make a real difference, will make a real change in this country.
George Osborne, the Shadow Chancellor, said that if you didn't call an election, you'd bottled it. And that is a phrase that will be heard up and down the country today.
Do you know, the easiest thing I could have done is call an election, because I could have called an election on competence, that over the summer we've been doing all these things, and I hope that people will understand that dealing with terrorism and foot and mouth and dealing with all these things, we'd acted competently.
And yet, if you look at the events of the last 2 weeks, this is going to go down as a huge miscalculation at very best. You've marched people up to the top of the hill, and now you're marching them back down again, because the Conservatives have had probably the most successful party conference in changing the mood of the country and changing the polls in recent memory.
But let me just say, we will win an election, because when you come to dissect these Conservative policies, if you throw £5 billion at a problem, you know, 2p on income tax at a problem, and not show how you're going to fund it, then for a short moment you can persuade people that you've got a policy. But when it comes to the forensic job of dissecting that policy, it will be found that the Conservative policies not only doesn't add up, but it leads to economic disarray.
But you understand why, when people look at the extraordinary excitement about a general election that was being generated at the Labour Party conference, and then 2 weeks later, when the polls have turned, and you suddenly say, well, actually, there isn't going to be a general election, they draw the obvious conclusion.
But that's the party conference season, Andrew. Parties go up and down, they have their conferences, they come and go. That's the party conference season. The party conference season is over. That's why you've got to make it absolutely clear where we are. And where we are is that we continue with the business of setting out a vision for the future of this country.
Yes.
And I believe that that vision in detail can be implemented over the next period of time. And I want to show people how I'm doing it. And I think people will understand that that's why I'm in politics. That's why I'm in public life. Not just to deal with individual crises competently, although I'd like to do it, but to set out that vision and to implement it in practice.
And in that party conference season, the Conservatives set out with the goal of knocking you off that general election, because they too were concerned about the polling, and they have succeeded triumphantly. Very, very good speech, and you must acknowledge it, from David Cameron. And whatever you say about the funding of inheritance tax and indeed the stamp duty issue, hugely popular measures which were resoundingly welcomed in the country.
But if they're pleased that there's no general election, it's because they thought they would lose it. And it just emphasises my point. We could have won an election now or won an election sooner or later. But the issue for me is not an election simply about competence, although I believe we would have won that, but an election about our vision for the future. And look, you know, if you take housing, for example, and the Conservatives have proposals on inheritance tax and stamp duty, what people want to see is a rounded policy where you're building more houses, young people can get into owner occupation, people have a fair deal when they're in their homes, and a
lot of people would like to see an end to inheritance tax.
Well, the Conservatives don't want an end to inheritance tax. The question is, what is the fairest system of inheritance tax? And we can have a debate about that in future weeks. I mean, we've raised the threshold for inheritance tax so that more people are exempted as a result of raising the threshold. 94% of the population do not pay inheritance tax. But we can have a debate about fairness. Neither party wants to abolish inheritance tax. We can have a debate about that in the future.
But it's something you're going to look look at again?
Of course, and I was looking at it when I was Chancellor. We continue to look at these issues. But, you know, the policy, everybody wants inheritance tax. The Conservatives even want it to stay. The question, however, is what is the fairest rate at which it's charged? And, of course, what is the exemption level for people in the future?
Before we leave the subject of election timing, the last few weeks have been enormously destabilising for lots of parts of the real economy and the world out there. And some of that destabilisation was caused by your own office. For the benefit of clarity, since you are rejecting the idea of a mandate general election right at the beginning of your premiership, are you also rejecting the idea of a general election in next spring or next autumn? Can we at least have some clarity about the fact there's not going to be an election for a while?
I think that's not likely that we'll have an election, because I want to get on with the business of governing.
Not likely when? What's the period?
Not likely this year, not likely whatever dates you were suggesting.
Not likely next year?
I want to get on with the business of governing. I've said, look, you know, you ask yourself...
I mean, it's a serious question just because it gets people jittery and destabilised.
But you know, Andrew, you ask yourself, when you're Prime Minister, you've got the power to make this decision. People come to you and say, you must consider it, and you've got to consider it. That's the only fair thing to do, because you've got to exercise power with responsibility.
And can you, thinking about the next period, then at least reassure those people watching that unless there's some extraordinary cataclysm, there will not be a general election called in 2008, even if a few opinion polls show you well ahead?
Well, that's unlikely. I've just said it. It's unlikely.
Right. And between the time when you were actively considering calling an immediate general election a couple of weeks ago and now, what's changed?
I had responsibility to consider what the opposition parties, as well as our party, was saying.
Do you think you let it run a bit too strongly, though?
I mean, we would have won an election, I believe, sooner or later. As I say, I'm...
You're not worried by these new polls?
No, I'm relishing the chance of taking on the Conservatives on what I believe are very economically risky and dangerous proposals. And I believe that once people see the small print of a 5 billion black hole and what it means for the stability of the economy, they'll be very worried about what the Conservatives have promised, because anybody can promise £5 billion. The question is, can you afford to do so? So that is a debate for the future. But if I'm honest, the real reason that I have decided is that I believe the country deserves to see from us our vision for change for the future and the implementation of it in a way that was not possible, let's be honest, because of the events of the summer.
Even though the dithering, which will be the accusation.
I don't accept that at all. I don't accept it at all. I said
that will diminish. That will diminish. You're going to take a hit for a while.
But I don't accept that. The party conference season is one thing, and people will speculate in the party conference seasons. You have a responsibility to listen to what people say, and then you make your decision and you get on with it.
What about